Okay, so I'm gonna be leading up to the single leg RDL with a barbell, but before we get there, we're gonna start out just with a PVC hip hinge, or PVC good morning. PVC is gonna start on the back. Tell your client to make sure they keep contact with their butt, their shoulders, and their head with the PVC the entire time. Nice soft knees, and think about bowing back. And squeeze the glutes and drive out of the heels to stand up. Another thing with the feet placement is feet are going to be right underneath those hips. They're not going to be in a squat stance. They're going to be right underneath the hips in a more narrow stance. This is a great way to teach body positioning when it comes to the RDL, making sure that the head stays nice and neutral, the core stays nice and tight, and we get into our hamstrings. Next is going to be the weighted good morning. I have a dumbbell here. You can use a dumbbell, you can plate, kettlebell, whatever weight that you have. So for me, I have my nice hefty dumbbell, and the key here is to keep the core engaged. Once you add weight into the front position of a good morning, that's going to really make sure that your client has to turn their abs on and they are really getting into those hamstrings. Same thing, hinging of those hips, just like with that PVC, but the focus is going to be on squeezing those glutes. Once you feel those hamstrings start to tighten, squeeze the glutes to stand on up and keeping nice tight core throughout the entire movement. Next is going to be the glute bridge. The reason for this one is because you want to make sure that your athlete learns how to get those glutes and those hamstrings firing. The movement is very hamstring and glute dominant, so want to make sure that they are able to do that. So starting on the ground, supine. Good cue to start is with hands should be able to reach those feet. Those heels should be nice and close to the butt. Think about driving your knees out, but not splaying them open, but just keeping them from caving in. Core is gonna be nice and tight. Drive out of the heels, squeeze the glutes, and drive all the way up to those hips, get fully extended. Now, on the return, nice and slow, coming all the way down to the ground, and then squeezing back up. This is a great way to learn how to get those glutes firing and get those hamstrings turned on. Once the client has progressed from that, since we are building up to a single leg, we're actually going to do single leg glute bridges as well. If I was doing a normal deadlift, then I'd probably just skip the single leg, but since we are building up to the single leg, I'm going to have clients move on into the single leg glute bridge. So for this setup, you can either have the client start with a bent or a straight leg. Personally, I like the straight leg just because it requires more strength and requires more muscle recruitment. It's the same exact cues, thinking about driving up and then slowly returning down so that that client builds that control. Explosive on the way up, squeezing those glutes, and control on the way down. Obviously, since it is contralateral, you want to do both sides. Next, moving on from the single leg glute bridge would be a kettlebell or a dumbbell RDL, starting top down. The reason for this is because RDLs, you're not going to be bending all the way down to the floor. The weight's never really going to be touching the ground, so it's going to be a top-down approach. You can hold kettlebell or a dumbbell. I have, again, my dumbbell, so I'm going to be demonstrating with that. Again, we're going to focus on keeping your abs nice and tight. Shoulders are going to be packed. That's super important when it comes to the RDL. And again, same cues here, keeping the shoulders back, abs are going to be tight, and hinging down. Squeeze the glutes to stand on up. And another thing to think about when we have this RDL weight is just going to when you feel those hamstrings really start to tighten, start to fire. That's going to be your position. Everyone's built a little bit differently, so it's going to look a little different on everyone. Next, after they've progressed from the kettlebell or the dumbbell, then they're going to grab a barbell. The reason for the barbell is because we want them to be familiar with the movement and know how to do the RDL with two legs before they move on to single. So this dumbbell is going to stay nice and tight to the body. You're going to instruct your client to not break contact with the barbell. Hands are going to be over. They're going to be about thumbs length out from the thighs, or usually on barbells it's thumbs length out from the rough part. And same exact thing. Little cue here that I like to give is elbow pits facing forward. Doing this really gets the lats turned on, so I like to give my clients that cue as well. Same thing as all of the other ones is hinge those hips, keep the abs tight, chest up nice and tall. All the way down, I go to right below my knees because that's where I feel my hamstrings start to turn on. It may look a little bit different for everyone else because everyone's built differently, but getting to the point where you feel those hamstrings fire is the stopping point, and then really focusing on squeezing the glutes to stand up nice and tall and drive out of the heels. Now, once we've moved on from this, we're gonna get into more of the balancing side of things. So before we get into the full leg up in the back, we're gonna go to a kickstand. Kickstand RDL is a really good way just to get the balance, kind of the coordination that's gonna be needed, familiar with the clients. So the kickstand you can either do, depending on how skilled someone is, add weight or not. I'm choosing to not add weight. You're going to just find that balance in one leg. You don't want to have any pressure really on that back foot. Just keep contact with the floor. And it's going to be the same exact instructions of hinging at the hips, keeping a nice flat back, keeping a nice tight core, going to the point where you feel the hamstrings turn on, and then you're going to stand up. That is our kickstand RDL. After we've mastered the kickstand RDL, then you're gonna go to a no weight RDL. So just getting into that position so that you know how to do an actual single leg RDL. Now, if I had a client with me, I would really make sure to keep those hips parallel to the floor. That is a really good thing to do when we're doing the no weight RDL, just so that people can learn the proper body positioning. So I like to say hands on the hips for this one. Kicking straight back is going to be the cue, and as you kick back, your chest falls forward. You're going to go until you feel those hamstrings turn on, and you're going to control the movement on the way back up. If a client has a hard time with balance, you can give them like PVC to keep them balanced. Now, the progression from the PVC assist would be to a no PVC, and then they would move on from there. But this one is just going to transition straight into a one arm, one leg weighted RDL. So next, they will have their weight in their hand. So whatever hand has the weight, that leg is going to be the one going back. So since this is in my right hand, my right leg is going to be the one sending back, and my left leg is going to be my stance leg. You're going to want to make sure the client focuses on really finding that balance, find a spot on the floor to keep their eyes on, to keep their balance, and send those hips back, let that foot rise up, and squeeze those glutes to come back up. You want to think about that weight going straight down to the floor rather than out in front, keeping it nice and tight to the body. Once they have progressed from there, they're finally ready for the RDL with the barbell. So a single leg RDL with a barbell, aka my broomstick that has no broom on the end. The final thing is just going to be keeping that that barbell tight and in contact with that thigh the entire time of the movement. So it's going to be sending that leg back, keeping contact once you get to that point, scooping back up, and driving out of the heel. If your client starts to send forward on the toes, tell them to move back and really focus on getting into that mid or rear foot. That is my 10 progressions for the single leg RDL. Cool.